It is time for us to talk about our main event of the evening. It is Deiveson Figueiredo taking on Alex Perez, and a bit of a history-making one as well. It is the first time since UFC 191 that the flyweights are headlining a pay-per-view.
I love to see it, honestly. I'm really excited. I've been a huge fan of the flyweight division for a long time now. I think it's one of the most underrated divisions. So many great fighters. I think people really underestimate how skilled the guys are just because they're so small and fast and agile. But make no mistake, I think it takes the highest skill of any division. I think that to even be ranked in flyweight, you could be a champion in other weight classes potentially. So I'm really excited for this fight. And I think I like this fight better than the Cody Garbrandt fight. How about you, Carl? Are you more excited for Perez versus Figueiredo, or would you have liked to seen Cody versus Figueiredo?
I have to be honest, it depends on which way you look at it, to be honest. In terms of what I believe is more deserving, this is the better fight for me. Because I think that one of the big things to come out of the lockdown era, in my opinion, has been the quality of the flyweight division. Because this was a division that the UFC were very, very close to closing down. But then Dana White spared them and said, hey, you've got to prove to yourself you're worthy of being part of this promotion. And the quality of the flyweight matches has been absolutely brilliant during 2020. So I think these guys have earned their place in the UFC, and I see this fight as a reward for that. For both Figueiredo, Perez, but also Brandon Moreno, Askar Askarov, Alexander Pantoja, all those guys. In terms of what I thought was a better fight, I actually think Figueiredo versus Garbrandt could have been very, very entertaining. Because you got two come forward knockout artists, both very aggressive. It could have been a very entertaining fight. My one fear though is if Cody Garbrandt had won that fight, which he's very capable of doing because he has a lot of power, the first thing he would have done was take that belt and jump straight back up to bantamweight and try and fight Piotr Jan. And then flyweight ends up in the same place it was when Cejudo jumped up to bantamweight.
Yeah, good points. I think our last podcast or two podcasts ago we talked about this and Cody not deserving the title shot. So a little bit of a blessing in disguise, him getting replaced here. And I actually think this fight is much more deserving. Obviously, you have Perez, who is 6-1 at flyweight in the UFC, Cody Garbrandt, who is 0-0 at flyweight in the UFC. And Perez, I think, presents a lot more of a difficult fight. I think that I had Figueiredo's chances at around 75 to 80% for the Cody Garbrandt fight, believe it or not. And for this fight, I'm more around 65 to 70% at maximum. And I think that Perez presents a lot more difficult stylistic matchup for Figueiredo. And I think that Perez has been a bit untested lately. He hasn't fought the highest level competition in the UFC. He fought Benavidez, had that crazy weird headbutt that led to his knockout exchange. And his other really high level victories over Formiga. His most recent fight was just chopping down the legs that you see of Formiga. It was a bit of a competitive striking fight, but Perez's leg kick, his calf kick was a huge X factor in that fight and led to a finish. And Figueiredo has had such an entertaining run in the UFC. He's only really struggled with grappling. He's only struggled with the takedowns of Jared Brooks. Jared Brooks took him down for about 7 minutes, kept him on his back for a lot of that fight. And Jussier Formiga, who I just mentioned, also took down Figueiredo, was able to pass his guard, mount him a few times, and win that fight via decision. So we've only really seen Deiveson Figueiredo struggle with takedowns and grappling in the UFC, and Perez presents a bigger takedown and grappling threat than Garbrandt. So I think this fight is very entertaining. I'll pass it back to you, Carl, so we don't talk for 10 minutes straight on this one, because this is such a great fight. I'll pass it back so you can share some more of your thoughts.
Do you think the Formiga factor is going to play a role in these two? Because it's obviously going to be a favour for Alex Perez that he was able to beat a guy in the first round that Figueiredo lost to.
It's possible, but I think the Formiga did lose by knockout in between those two fights, so he did, suffer a little more mileage, a little extra damage, and he had that fight versus Moreno where he lost. So I think that the Formiga that Figueiredo fought was a much better fighter than the one that Perez fought. But you still got to look at the head-to-head wins and say that Figueiredo lost to one, and then Perez finished him, and that's got to be a feather in the cap of Perez.
The counter-argument to that, though, is that Perez lost to Joe Benavidez and Figueiredo beat him twice.
Yeah, true. And another weird aspect of that fight, because that Perez fight was so weird. You can watch that fight in slow motion. There was some weird headbutt that went on in that fight that eventually led to the finish of Perez. And I don't really think that result was super indicative of how that matchup goes. So it's a shame we never got to see a rematch of that fight, Perez and Benavidez. But we did see the rematch of Figueiredo and Benavidez, an absolutely brutal fight. Figueiredo nearly killed him in that fight with so many knockdowns and choke attempts. Pretty hard to watch, honestly, the way the Fig dismantled Benavidez there.
And I think you can see a big factor in that when you look at the betting odds of Figueiredo. Just looking at my notes here, you've got Figueiredo minus 310, Alex Perez plus 240. How much of that is due to the performance against Benavidez? As fantastic as it was to do that to a guy who, let's be honest, should have been a UFC champion multiple times over. Very impressive. But how much of it was also taking advantage of a 35-year-old guy with a lot of mileage behind him?
Yeah, I do agree that Figueiredo got Benavidez at the right time. I mean, it would have been an interesting matchup even earlier on in Benavidez's career, just because of the way that Benavidez leans his head in. He was always susceptible to big counter punches. Of course, that's what Demetrius Johnson put him out with 7 years ago or something. So Figueiredo would have always been a dangerous matchup to Benavidez, but he did get very fortunate timing in the terms of the career of Benavidez. And I do think that we could be seeing Figueiredo being a little bit overvalued in the betting lines, coming off of those two nasty finishes over a high-level fighter in Benavidez, because he still has the problem of takedown defense. We did see some slight improvements in the Pantoja fight. We saw some great scrambling ability and submission attempts versus Benavidez. And I will say that about Figueiredo is only the best of the best control grapplers can really hold him down. Formiga was able to hold him down, but even Jared Brooks was mostly taking him down, and then Figueiredo would work his way back up to the feet and get right back to doing damage. Figueiredo is great at scrambling and throwing up submissions. He has a very tight guillotine choke that he caught Tim Elliott with when he tried to shoot for a takedown. So even when you're trying to wrestle Figueiredo, he can threaten you with that guillotine. He can threaten you with arm bars. He has good strikes off of his back. When he was on his back versus Formiga, he was cutting Formiga with punches and elbows off of his back. So even if you're taking down Figueiredo and getting your grappling going, you're still in danger of submissions, ground and pounds, his insane athleticism and scrambling ability. So even if, best case scenario for Alex Perez, he lands takedowns here and gets Figueiredo off of his feet, he's going to have a hard time keeping Figueiredo down, and he's going to have a hard time doing meaningful work with those takedowns, landing ground and pound, going for submissions. Even the best grappler in flyweight, Formiga, wasn't able to submit Figueiredo, so I do not think that Perez is going to submit Figueiredo. It's extremely hard to see him land in a TKO from ground and pound on Fig. So the way I see Perez winning this fight is by decision. It's by competing on the feet, having success with his leg kicks, landing some takedowns, winning some rounds with top position. But he's really going to have to put on a very well-rounded performance where he competes on the feet, he hits takedowns, he has incredible cardio to go into the later rounds. And personally, I have not seen enough of Perez, enough skill against high-level competition to think that he does that here. So ultimately, I will be picking Figueiredo, but I'll go back to Carl before I give my final thoughts on the odds and the prediction and everything.
I think if Alex Perez is going to have a chance of winning this fight, obviously he's going to be mixing in the takedowns, and he is good college wrestler, so he's always got that in his back pocket, and I do see him landing maybe one or two takedowns in the fight. But also as well, he's very fast for the weight class. I mean, flyweight is a fast weight class itself, but if there's one issue I've had with Figueiredo, he's a bit of a brawler in terms of like just trying to land that big right hand. And he does use some good angles to try and generate all that power. But I can see Alex Perez getting on the inside, trying to land those quick shots like he did against Shorty Torres, which helped lead to the stoppage in that one. I'm not confident enough to say that Alex Perez is going to win this fight by any means. But I'm looking at the community post. And at the moment, they've got Figueiredo at 90% to win this one over Alex Perez at 10%. I mean, put it this way. people give Felicia Spencer more of a chance to win her fight than they're giving Alex Perez, which I think is incredibly harsh.
Yeah, he's getting disrespected here, for sure. Even like I mentioned, the betting line has him at 75% Figueiredo. I think at best I would cap him 67 to 70%. So the betting value is on Perez in this one. He has a path to victory with those takedowns. And he's a good striker as well. You mentioned his performance against Shorty Torres. He showed great boxing, high output, good power in that one. He's a skilled boxer. He has those great calf kicks, as we mentioned. So he can compete on the feet versus Figueiredo. But I have just seen a lot more striking, a lot more accuracy, and of course the power from Figueiredo. I just haven't seen enough high-level striking from Perez to think that he will be able to compete and win the striking versus Figueiredo, which I ultimately think he will have to do to win. So for my official prediction, I agree with you. I think that we see Perez land some takedowns early. I think Perez will land 2 to 3 takedowns, but Figueiredo is going to be getting back up to the feet. He's going to be landing clinch strikes, very skilled clinch striker, good at landing elbows and knees on the break. And like the Jared Brooks fight, he's just going to be landing significant damage at range. And I think it eventually accumulates and becomes a knockout for Figueiredo. I'm going to go at the end of round 2, early round 3. I'll go with an official Figueiredo knockout round 2 as my official pick.
I'm going to say third round, but I agree with you. I think Figueiredo gets it done with the hands in the third round. I think Alex Perez is going to start the fight strong. I can see him maybe winning the first round, but we will see Figueiredo maybe come into his own in the second and get that stoppage in the third.